And we're back to our final session of Anger and Desire Webcast. Timmy and Richie will be talking about God's purpose in creating us with anger and desire as part of our emotional and relational makeup. This gets exciting as we look at how anger and desire can advance his kingdom here on earth. We have several things happening here before we reach the end of our time. First, I would like to address a little bit of a mistake that we made. We do have some viewers in College Place, but there was one viewer in particular, Jared. Thank you for watching. He is not in College Place. He made it very clear that he was in Walla Walla. And if you know College Place and Walla Walla, there is a difference. So thank you, Jared, and high five out for you for making that difference. We have 4 in, I hope I'm saying this right, Coca-Cola,
Yep.
Idaho. Thank you. Dillingham, Quincy, and Othello. Thank you so very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. So now the Browers will be sharing a presentation on anger and desire, kingdom purposes. Then we'll have our second Q&A session, and finally we'll wrap up sharing some resources to help you continue the journey you have begun as a couple this weekend. Be sure and stay tuned all the way to the end. So once again, if you're joining us online, you can email your questions or your prayer requests to angeranddirewebcast@gmail.com or text 509-993-7033. Once again, 509-993-7033. And now, please welcome the Browers one more time.
Well, we're back. That didn't feel like much of a break. Did that feel like much of a break to you?
That was pretty short.
That was pretty quick. So yes, we're happy to be here. I'm going to make a contribution to you guys in the front row so it doesn't distract me. So welcome all. You've made it to the final presentation. Yay! Our home team is going, woohoo! They're still clapping. They're still upright and alive. And
Bless them.
Yes. We've encouraged them to be interactive, and they've been awesome. So we're grateful to the home crew here with us. But we're grateful to all of you joining us from Alaska to Washington State to Idaho. It's exciting to know that we're part of something much bigger. And so this has been really fun. And I think for Timmy and I, every time we do something like this, we're just kind of humbled that anybody would even show up to hear anything we have to say. So thank you for honoring us with your time. This is a big commitment, and we're blessed to have you. We do want to talk at the end, so help me remember. We're going to talk about a resource, because a lot of times when you go through something like this, kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant, and you get to the end and go, now what? And so we want to answer. We have one option for the now what question if you're interested, and we'll talk about that at the end. But we're excited to talk about what is God's kingdom purpose for anger and desire. That's a place we haven't even remotely gone so far this weekend.
It's true. So we're going to start with a story. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, we had a 3-year-old man-child who had a new kitten. And he was so excited. It was one that we had found that had been abandoned, and when we bought our property, we didn't realize it came with 12 feral cats that were all procreating. That was I've never been the crazy cat lady, but I have had more than 24 cats at any given time. Kind of embarrassing, but we move on. So we found this sweet little baby, and it let us get close and pet it, and since it had no family to speak of that was taking care of it, we decided to take it in. And it was a small little creature, and we let it come in the house, in our bungalow, and Caleb loved it, and he'd pet it, and then we put it back out for the night. We had a special little cat house that we had out of wood, and it was a really good situation that we had. Get the cat on the bonus, put him out at night, all good. Until the fateful night where something went awry. So went out the next morning to say hi to the tiny little kitten. Thankfully, I went out before Caleb did, because I found pieces of it all over the porch. And there were bloody footprints of a skunk. We had put the food in the little house with it, thinking that way it could eat and didn't have to come out into the mean, cruel world to get its food, not even thinking that was inviting a predator to come in and get the food and the kitten. So I was a little concerned about that, And so I came back in. That was an understatement, by the way. And I said to Richie, there is a very unfortunate mess out on the porch that I need you to take care of, and I will talk to Caleb. So Caleb was in the loft at that point, and he was sitting, he was just starting to come down the ladder into the bungalow, because like I said, it was really tiny space. And I said, hey, bud, we need to talk. And last night, the kitten had a run-in with a skunk. And I'm guessing that the skunk went after its food and then decided to eat it too. And your kitten is no longer with us. It died last night. And that sweet boy just threw his head back and howled his protest. It's not fair, and it's so sad, and oh, he was so disturbed for about 30 seconds. And then he brought his head down. It's one of those moments that's kind of seared into my memory, is he went from howling to pulling his head down in all the intensity of 3-year-old justice. And he said, we need to find that skunk. We need to kill that skunk, because it's not okay what that skunk did to my cat. And I wasn't exactly sure what to do with that. I'm a little more used to the world of women, apparently, where we bemoan things a lot longer than that, and we may or may not ever get to the injustice of the moment. I don't think I grew up I know I didn't grow up in a world where justice was a really high priority. And it was really, really poignant for me to see the intensity of my little warrior who said, wrong has been done, and it will not be done on my watch. We're gonna kill it. But what about us? What is our response to injustice? What was your response to the Syrian refugee crisis? What was your response to the recent hurricanes or the fires in Montana or California? What about oppression, human trafficking, violence, injustice? Do you live in a world where these things are present? Do you get angry because your team lost? Or the traffic was really thick due to construction and you were late to where you wanted to go? I think it's really, really important that we ask the question, what are we getting angry about? The first question about the Syrian refugee crisis is a very convicting question for me, because my response to the Syrian refugee crisis, especially once the pictures started emerging from what was happening in that, my response was to turn away. And I wasn't turning away due to self-care. I was turning away because I felt impotent in my grief over their suffering. And my turning away didn't ease their suffering. It only eased mine. So in this case, if I were to have allowed grief, I would have gotten angry. And at some level, I decided I didn't have time to be angry. Because if I got angry, then I would have been compelled to do something. And I looked at how much was on my plate and said, I can't add anything else right now. And there's something that gets lost between the 3-year-old who says, wrong is being done and it should not be, and us often, and I'm speaking as much or more to myself as anyone in this room or in our audience, when we go, I don't actually have time to get angry about that.
So the question that needs to be asked is, why aren't we more angry? The reality is, as we've spent our time, at least what comes clear to me, and I'm hoping to you as well this weekend, is that too often we're angry about things that don't ultimately matter, and we're not angry about the things that do. Am I somehow not on? Oh.
You're on, but you're not talking.
I'm talking, but I'm not on.
That's always a concern.
Do I need a different microphone? No, I'm good? Okay. I'm talking and I'm on. Phew. So, or I'm not on.
It doesn't.
No, but we get angry about things that ultimately, in the big, grand, eternal scheme of things, don't matter. right? Those are the things we typically get angry about. And the things that ultimately matter a great deal, not only do we not get angry about them, we don't even think about them too often. We tune off the news. We veg out somewhere else. We do something else. So the question is, why aren't we more angry? And we're going to look at a few reasons that we've thought of ways that we actually insulate ourselves from righteous anger. Number one would be we anesthetize desire so that we don't care as much. There's nothing to get angry over. If we get busy, we get caught up on Facebook, we get caught up in whatever, we actually can anesthetize the desires. There's just nothing to be angry about. I'm just busy doing my little thing here on planet Earth.
So how are some of the ways that we run from desire and anesthetize anger? I know for one way that I have to be really careful of in my own life is media, because media can be very saturating in the sense that there are so many things that we have the option to be angry and grieving over. And there's just too much. You can't take it all in. So that's the one side. But on the other side, I find that I really struggle at times. I'm actually taking a Facebook fast right now because of some of my challenges in this area. Is that when I start to feel overwhelmed, I can go to Facebook to check that one thing and completely lose myself in dissociation for 45 minutes to an hour. The time is gone. I have nothing to show for it. I don't actually feel better for the absencing of my normal world. But it gives me, it's a way of anesthetizing. It's a form of purposeful dissociation. It could be gaming, it could be Netflix, it could be all kinds of things. But when we choose to go to media to escape our world, it's again, and I want to say there's a difference between self-care and escape. I don't think that Facebook is inherently evil. I don't think Netflix is inherently evil, depending on your content. But what is challenging is when we go to something else so that we can avoid reality. Because reality is grief-inducing. And at some level, it should be, or we are anesthetizing desire.
Another way that we numb out, anesthetize desire, is to stay busy. And for those of us who like to work hard, there's a certain self-righteousness around this because we're working. We're getting things done. We're bringing home the bacon or the Vegelinks, however you look at it there. And so we stay busy. But what staying busy does for us is it means we're too busy to care. I'd care, but I don't have the time, right? Kind of reminds you of maybe another parable Jesus told about some church people who were on such a tight deadline getting to church headquarters, they didn't have time to care for the Samaritan who was bleeding out in the ditch, right? We get so busy that, and I'm not saying, look, we have to work, okay? I get that. So I'm not saying work is bad. Hear me clearly. What I'm saying is we need to be self-reflective and evaluate, am I using work and busyness, because busyness doesn't have to be work. There's lots of ways to be busy. Am I using my busyness to keep me disconnected from some painful reality that I don't want to touch base with? We just need to ask these questions sometimes. Another one is contempt. Have you ever thought of this? We use contempt to keep us from feeling righteous anger, right? And today, I think this is a huge one in our culture. Does anybody notice how contemptuously we speak to one another in our culture today? Online and off, in the news and out. I mean, if you don't think exactly like me, that means that you're an idiot. That's the perspective that we are operating from in our culture. We speak to one another from a position of contempt. Does that contempt actually make us smarter or righter? I know, righter's not a word, I get it. No, it doesn't make us righter, it makes us wronger. That's right, it makes us wronger. No, but what it does is we use contempt as a wall to protect our hearts from the harsh realities of the world out there, from our own insecurities. Because as one counselor that we worked with said, all contempt is self-contempt. And ultimately, when we express contempt about all the people out there who are so less than us, we're actually talking about how much we feel less than everyone around us. So contempt is a way that we separate ourselves from things that should, realities that should make us angry. A great biblical example of contempt would be the story Jesus told about the Pharisee and the publican going to worship. And the Pharisee looked up in his very bright white, not suit, but robe, and said, "Oh God, I thank thee that I'm not like these other losers." Right? That's Richie translation. But that was the general gist. And what is he expressing? He's expressing contempt. And the publican comes in and says, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And Jesus looks at the story and says, "One of these two went home justified." And it wasn't the one expressing contempt. Finally, crusades. Another way that we anesthetize or separate ourselves from realities that need righteous anger is crusades that ignore the deeper needs of our world. If you look around today, people are caught up in their own personal crusades. It might be the crusade to change the Seahawks colors. I'm making that up. The crusade to...
Because that would be completely inappropriate.
Right, sorry, bad illustration. It might be the crusade to, I don't know, do away with paper as a reality in our country. You name it, there's so many crusades. You can go online and find all kinds of crusades. I get emails on a regular basis from people who are starting initiatives to collect signatures for some new crusade, right? But here's the deal. There's crusades that are needed, but I'm talking about crusades that ignore the deeper needs of our world. Crusades that are all about fighting injustice and idiots, right? We're going to go set the record straight. But they ignore the fact that children are starving in their community. They ignore the fact that women are being beaten and abused and there's no shelter, no safe place for them to go. They ignore the fact that there is an entire nation of people who are caught in the grip of civil war and they're dying by the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. What is wrong with us? We use these crusades to protect ourselves from the more brutal realities that we cannot bear entering into. And don't mistake me. The church has more crusades inside the church than anybody. We're not immune. We are filled with the crusades to change the carpet in the church sanctuary. Crusades to keep the carpet in the church sanctuary. What a ridiculous waste of time given the reality of the world we live in. And yet we pour ourselves into these things like they're all that matters because they keep us from having to touch base with the things that really do matter.
Another thing we do to anesthetize desire is that we make vows that say, "I will never do that again because I never want to be hurt like that again." We've all got our own stories that we bring into this, and a simple explanation that we see illustrated with far too much frequency in our home is, one brother does something to another brother that really, really upsets him. And his response is, "You know what? I am never, ever, ever playing with you again." And at a simpler level, that is I am never going to care what you think again. I'm never going to invest again so that you can never hurt me like that again. You never get to say no to my desire again. Now, thankfully, in the world of small boys, that's usually about a 10-minute fix, and we're okay, and we're back, being warriors and taking on the world. But especially when we make those vows as children, whether it's conscious or not, and we bring them into adulthood, there is a level of, I'm never going to invest in the world and care as much as I cared when I was 8, when I was 10, when I was 12, because I was burned. I risked and I was hurt. I was devastated. And I'm not going to ever get near anything that's going to resemble that ever again. And that keeps us as a distance from both desire and appropriate righteous anger. Now, that leads a question, and it kind of goes back to that media thing we were talking about, where we can easily become saturated with how much there is to grieve, how much there is to appropriately get angry about in the world around us. So how do we figure out what we should be grieving? How do we figure out what is our calling to get angry about? Because we really can't get angry about everything, but we do need to get angry about some things. So it begs the question, where are we called to engage our passion? What areas of our life need our anger? And for me, how I answer that question is, I am a mental health counselor. I work a lot with trauma, not exclusively, but to a large extent. And so I have the privilege of sitting with women, mostly, who have experienced abuse, violence, trauma of all kinds of different varieties, from, little when they were little people to more recent things. And that is a place that brings all of what is the best of me, honestly. I have to think very hard. I have to do a lot of research. But really what keeps it going is anger, appropriate anger, not anger at my clients. And to some extent, it's not even anger at those who have harmed them, but it's anger that evil doesn't get to win here. Not on my watch. It's Caleb's the skunk needs to die. I am going to do everything in my power and bring the best of God's gifting in who I am to stand against evil right here and say, not on my watch. If I have a breath left in me, I am going to stand against this harm that has come against my clients. And that is a place where I feel like I bring anger in the best way that I can bring it.
It was interesting, as you and I were talking about this question, Timmy looked at me and said, so Richie, where's the place that God's calling you to exert your anger for the benefit of his kingdom? And I went, And it led to a really great conversation. And it wasn't a long conversation as we started talking, and Timmy reflected some things that she sees in me as we've spent a lot of years together now. And what came out of that was that I believe that God is calling me to bring righteous anger to battle for biblical truth with relational resonance. What does that mean? I have a passion for taking biblical truth and applying it in a practical way that people go, oh, I can wrap my hands around that. Do I need righteous anger for that? Sometimes. Because when you bring biblical truth, other people are going to bring other perspectives, and there has to be a time and a place and a person, and I think lots of people, not just me, help us if it's only me, but there needs to be people who will stand and say, I love you. And we can talk this through, but we're going to do it in a Christ-honoring, respectful manner. We don't have to come to the same conclusion, but if we're going to honor God, we have to agree that we're going to love one another when we get to this end of this conversation. And that dialogue is vanishing the church almost as fast as it's vanishing our nation. And I believe that it calls for righteous anger to be able to stand in the church and in the public sphere today and say, this is what the character of God looks like, and this is how we're going to engage one another in the areas we disagree. And we're not going to permit you to attack you. We're going to say, no, we don't do that here. We have civil dialogue here. That's what I believe God's calling me to, and that's a passion that he's placed in my heart.
So if you aren't an angry person, I would invite you to consider why not. And I'm not meaning the kind of anger, that says mommy needs a rest time, the furrowed brow of rawr. No, I'm talking about the kind of firmness that brings strength and power to a situation, but in such a way that those who need healing and children come because you are the safety. Because that's what, with Jesus in the temple, when he was cleansing the temple from the money changers, the children ran to him. So there was something in his anger that felt secure and safe. And so, yes, I'm saying be an angry person. Be a crazy angry person. But be the kind of angry that those who are disenfranchised say, I am safe here. I don't have to cower in the face of this kind of anger.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about this last night, that God gets angry about broken relationships and injustice or lack of compassion. Those are things that cause God to move towards anger. So I want to encourage you to take an inventory of what you get angry about. What do you see? If you ask yourself the question, what do you get angry about? What are the things that bring that anger to the surface for you. What comes up?
Some of the questions that can help filter out that, and we really would invite you to actually do an actual, write it down on paper. What makes you angry? The good, the bad, and the ugly. What makes you angry? Where are the breaks in your relationships? Where is there need for protection? Where is there injustice? When you are angry, how do you communicate it? Do you only share the context? Well, you did this thing, and it really, really bothered me. You didn't do that thing. Do you blame? Do you control? Do you demand? How are you? What makes you angry, and how are you in your anger? And get really, really clear about that. And if you think you're doing really well with it, I would encourage you to ask a person or two in your life. It could be a close friend, it could be a spouse, but ask them, I'm kind of doing an inventory here, and I'm just kind of curious, how do you relate to me in my anger? How do I respond to you when I'm angry? What am I like in my anger? Because it's really important for us to have a clear understanding of who we are in our anger if we're going to even be able to evaluate, are we being righteous in our anger, and what would it mean to make it still deeper through desire?
Here's some questions for you to consider. Do you allow desire to be in the room with your anger? We talked about that a lot this weekend, that righteous anger is always paired with desire or grief, right? So do you allow desire to be in the room with your anger? Do others wither in the face of your anger? How do others react or relate when you're angry? I really believe that we need to begin practicing communicating desire. We've talked about that a lot. How many times has Jerry sent me home? You've heard me talk about my friend Jerry. I've lost track of how many times I would go to him and I'd come in with some story, she did, da, 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 da. And he'd look at me, and before we were done, he would send me out the door saying, why don't you try sharing with Timmy again, but let her see your hurt and your grief instead of just your anger. It takes. I'm not done. I'm still working at it. That's a long journey to learn to share grief and not just anger when something has hurt me or frustrated or disappointed me. But he kept sending me out the door with that assignment over and over, and I'm learning, I'm growing, and picking that up.
I'd say we're both growing and learning. I don't think either of us have arrived by any stretch. So this is about as close as a formula as I'm going to give. Some guidelines for your consideration. And that is, how do we begin communicating our anger and desire in helpful ways that are invitational? And the first one, probably if you could only go home with one, it would be this one, and that is, please slow down. When you feel anger rise, slow down so you have time to be curious before you respond. What desire is fueling your anger? What is the threat? Can you identify those things? Because when you're starting to become more aware of those, then you have a better chance of expressing your anger in a way that is invitational and invite someone to join you rather than run away from you.
And I'm just having a thought as you're saying that. I think one of the things that's probably been the most helpful thing for me in slowing down anger is I just need to separate myself from the situation for a little bit, a lot of times, right? And what made all the difference for Timmy and I is rather than just storming out, slam the door on my way out, I would look at her and say, you know what? I'm feeling myself getting pretty angry. I need to go for a walk. Can we reconvene in 30 minutes? And what that did is that let her know I'm not just going to ignore this and she's not going to just bear the brunt of my cold silence for the next day or whatever. We'd say, no, we're coming back to this in 30 minutes, and I'd go for a walk. And that would give me time, and maybe more importantly, God time, to get through to me and kind of slow things down so that I could get back into my front part of my brain and get that rational thinking part of my brain back online and have a much different outcome from the conversation.
It's true, and it was really important that there's always that timeline of coming back, because otherwise I feel left abandoned in a corner, and that is also not invitational. So that way anger doesn't get to win. Anger gets to be the tool for further exploration.
Yeah. So as you're slowing down, one of the questions that's another good question to ask is, do you want to punish or hurt the other? What are you feeling like you want to do? Can you communicate what you want to communicate without demand or control? Can you share your anger with equal parts of desire? If you're not in a place to do those things, it may not be time to re-engage the conversation yet. So that means that you want to be in the place where you're ready to communicate in a better way if you want to get a better outcome. One of the things that Timmy and I have adopted in the last year and a half or something is we ask ourselves the question, who do I want to be in this situation? Who do I want to be? So whether the other person reacts the way I want them to or not, at the end of the day, am I going to be happy with how I conducted myself? That's been a powerful question for us to ask, especially if we're going into sticky conversations. Who do I want to be? And what am I going to be happy with when I walk out the other side and say, yep, that's who I wanted to be? And that's really helped us get clear on how we wanted to relate, whether the other person related well or not. And in some cases they didn't, and we could still walk away and go, wow, that was a train wreck, and we were exactly who we wanted to be. You see the difference? It's just a clearness on this is how I want to function. God help me. This is who I want to be in this moment, in this conversation. We had a situation, and this was, for me, this is probably one of the most painful, triggering moments of our marriage. Timmy and I got into a fight one night. I don't have any idea what the topic was, but it was heated. And
we both brought a fair bit of anger to bear in that one.
There was a lot of fire.
I don't remember the context either, but I do remember the vitriol that was coursing through my veins.
And mine. Yeah,
yes.
A lot of fire, no smoke. It was hot. And in fact, it was so hot that Timmy did something that she's never done before. And she got up and she said, you know what, I'm done. I'm out of here. And she walked out of the house.
Because I was so angry, and if I recall correctly, again, I don't remember the exact context, but I couldn't communicate in a way that Richie would hear me. And I tried, and I tried, and I tried, and I tried it from several different angles, and whatever it was, he was dead set that this is what was, and I said, I'm out, I'm done, I'm leaving for a while. And I was furious, and I walked out the door with the car keys.
I was devastated. I watched her walk out to the car, and the lights come on, and she drove away, and I'm like, and my anger very quickly drained away, and I'm like, what just happened? Well, my mentor, Jerry the Jerk, had been encouraging me that when I had these painful moments, I should view them as opportunities to get more in touch with my heart and my feelings and my story.
That's why he calls him Jerry the Jerk.
That's
right
why,
there.
right there. And somewhere, as I started kind of coming down from the anger and the pain of what had just happened with her leaving sunk in, I think God kind of went tap, tap, tap. And I went and I got my journal. And I pulled up my journal on the couch in our house, and I started journaling, God, why? And I'm praying, God, why? Why is this such a big deal that Timmy just drove away? Well, if you were here last night, you already know the answer. I grew up in a home where fights in my home ended with one parent storming out of the house, slamming the door, and driving away after saying, I'm going to go kill myself, and they'd be gone sometimes for 10 days. As soon as I connected the dots, then I heard Jerry's voice in my head saying, now, Richie, just sit. Just sit with the grief of what has been lost in your story. Just let it sink in and actually feel that. And I went, oh. And I felt incredible grief because all of a sudden, here I am, a grown man, but in my heart and in my body, I'm a little boy, and his mommy just walked out the door, angry and threatening suicide. That's where I was. I went, oh. And I was able to sit there and actually care for that little boy and say, you know what? I'm so sorry that was part of reality when I was young. It's not how it was supposed to be. But that understanding of following that grief down, because I realized that in my heart, what lived as a boy and now as a man was a desire to be chosen, secure. And I wanted to know that I was secure. And when my mom left, that didn't communicate security. And when Timmy got in the car and drove away, it didn't communicate security. In fact, everything in my limbic system was firing, warning, 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 it's happening again. And so as I connected with that pain, that changed everything that night, because when Timmy eventually did come home and we sat down on the couch, I was able to look at her and say, look, I know we've got this thing. Got this thing that got us all
The
fired up.
context that had started us off.
The context is unchanged, so there it is. But I just want you to know the impact of your choosing to walk out and drive away and how that connects to my story and what that just did to my heart. And in me sharing my grief and my suffering in that moment, it changed everything in the interaction between us because her heart was drawn to my expression of grief and hurt.
And the other thing that his being willing to express his grief did is, I don't want to step on that space. I don't want to have it feel like a reenactment of his early years and trauma. And so it has also created a sensitivity in me to, I'm going to do my absolute best to not get near that story in our interactions. I don't want you to feel panicked like you're a really little boy and you're in a lot of danger. And so, again, then it wasn't so, did we still have to deal with what had caused the fight? Yes, we did. And we did. But to understand, again, where desire and grief fuel the anger is so vitally important.
So this is really a call to begin allowing grief over our losses. Our own stories, this is just reality, our own stories of grief are often what fuels our anger. Because we don't allow grief, we just get more and more angry and triggered, and we are running from past threats as well as current ones. And you can see that cycle, and it just goes down. It's a spiral going down until we do something to stop that cycle and get off the merry-go-round. Our stories, unaddressed, lead toward unrighteous anger. But our stories addressed will move us towards righteous anger and grief and reconciliation.
One of the unfortunate things about being the children of a mental health counselor is mommy experiments on you occasionally. And one of the things, I do it with my clients, but that's a very structured environment. I'm also not the one who causes them frustration the vast majority of the time. But I tried something with the kids over the last few months, and it's actually really working beautifully, and it's so counterintuitive and so intuitive depending on which side you go on. So the kids get into something with each other or with a friend or even with one of us. And instead of trying to say, okay, no, don't get angry, I actually have been practicing allowing them and inviting them to deepen their anger so that they'll get more angry about the situation. But then as they're deeply in their anger, turning it to what they lost. And so, again, turning it into grief, that's the part of, because we've been working on this for months, I've been thinking, okay, so how does this work in relationships? And again, the kids are there to be utilized in experimentation. And it's been so interesting to watch because it actually doesn't take that much to, as long as I'm listening really well. So like they'll say, one brother say, well, he hit me. Yeah, he hit you and it hurt. It did hurt. And he gets more and more angry as I'm naming what his losses were in this situation. And then, and I can't think off the top of my head exactly how it happens, but it has every time, that it ends up shifting into, yeah, he really hurt me. And again, our children are very in touch with their emotions. And so, they will say, I had our middle boy saying, I really felt like he didn't want me to be his brother anymore. And he really, when he did this thing, he would have been happy if I just went away and stayed away. Oh, baby, that hurts so much. It does. And now we've moved out of the anger and into the grief. And then what I try to do, if I can make all parties be amenable, is, and it's been working interestingly, is have the offended or offending brother come in and say, are you in a place that you can hear what the effect of your actions on your brother? And at this point, we're not talking about, well, you hit me and it really ticked me off. It was, when you did that, I really felt like you didn't want me here anymore. And I can tell you, without fail, the offending brother turns the other with shock, usually tears in his eyes, and say, I would never want you to go away and never come back. I love you. You're like my best friend. You really tick me off sometimes, but I really, really am glad glad that you're my brother. And we're able to talk through it. But again, it's that process of allowing anger to deepen, and then grief deepens. And then again, it's not about I need to power up to protect myself. And at this point, I'm the catalyst for comfort, not so much the offending brother, because these are small boys and we're still working on these things like nurturing and empathy. But as grief deepens, I'm able to give that comfort, and then a conversation can happen and reconciliation happens. Now, does that mean it's never going to happen again? Ha ha ha, of course it's going to happen again, probably that day at some level. There's another altercation between them. But the goal is to keep the relational debit card pretty even, so that what is taken out is put back in, so that the balance sheet stays even. And that happens, I'm finding at least, best through deepening anger, deepening grief, and then having a conversation where desire is expressed.
Yeah. All right, note takers, here's another one you need to write down. This is another statement, you just need to get it. We will struggle to have the capacity to care about what God cares about when we are stuck in our own cycles of avoiding anger and desire. We will struggle to have the capacity to care about what God cares about when we're stuck in our own cycles of avoiding anger and desire. This is, by the way, some of you are worrying about this perhaps. This is not an invitation to self-absorbed navel-gazing, but rather an openness to allowing God to walk us into our stories of pain and loss while opening our hearts to the suffering of the world. See the difference? This is not about just starting a journey. It's all about me. Oh, me. No, this is about a different journey where we're allowing God to open us up to our stories and to the needs of the world at the same time. That we can see both, and only God can do that. I don't think that we have capacity as humans to do that on our own.
And to look at the slide for a moment, these unaddressed stories of grief really are what fuel our unrighteous anger. When we say, I've got this big button that gets pushed when certain things happen, those are unaddressed stories. That's what causes those big trigger buttons. When it comes to, say, over the laundry. Did Richie do anything wrong, as we talked about last night, when he brought down the laundry? No, he was trying to be helpful. But it was my own places where I haven't grieved that fueled that kind of anger. And when we're in that place, we naturally want to protect against the pain, and so we shift to demand and control to try to make it okay. And that's why it really is so vital that we're willing to look at our own stories of anger and grief, and where was desire when we were little? Was it something that was inappropriate? Was it something that was always secondary to the grown-ups' needs? Those are the kind of things we have to evaluate if we want to engage the world well. Because when we are stuck in our own unprocessed stories, we aren't going to have the energy to engage the world well.
I think this is just summarizing what you just said. So, one of the things that I think the enemy uses to keep us out of engaging the world and the needs of the world is he will whisper in your ear, look at you, you're such a mess. Who do you think you are to do ... fill in the blank, right? How many of you have ever heard that message whispered in your head? Who do you think you are? Yeah, I think most of us have heard it at some time. And what he's talking about is he's zeroing in on the broken parts of our stories. And by the way, if you've been here all weekend and haven't figured out you have a broken part or two, stand by. We'll talk to you afterwards and help you see that. But no, we all have broken parts of our stories. And so the enemy zeroes in on those broken parts and says, who do you think you are? But you know what? He's a liar and the father of lies, right? The truth is exactly the opposite. It is our stories of brokenness that qualify us to minister to a hurting world. Who wants to hear from somebody who's always had everything together and never gotten anything wrong? Do you want to take advice from that person? I don't. Self-righteous know-it-alls? No, I don't want to hear anything they have to say. Now, the truth is that person doesn't even exist. They only think they do, which is even a greater tragedy. But we're not talking about that here tonight, right? But the truth is that it is our brokenness. It is our pain. It is our stories that qualify us to reach out and touch others, because our stories of brokenness and failure resonate with theirs, and then we can connect them and put their hand in the hand of the one who's given us hope and redemption. It's our stories. It's our stories that connect.
It's true. And like Richie said, righteous anger and desire have to be present for us to engage the world in redemptive ways. I remember a few seasons ago where we were interacting with some friends, and they were going through a really hard time. And I was watching Richie just be moved with compassion. This is quite a while ago. As he was watching them, tears were even coming to my 0 compassion score husband when it comes to how he generally. Compassion is not the lens he sees things through the first time, typically. But I was watching him just on the verge of weeping over the pain and their suffering. And I was kind of jealous because I was like, I can bring pretty significant stories of harm to my husband. He goes, yeah, I'm sorry about that. And I'm left going, I know I don't always communicate real well, but that response doesn't really meet the need or even get near it, not even the same room, actually. And I was jealous because I knew he had the capacity somewhere because I'd seen him offer that kind of care to others. But it wasn't something that was a part of our relationship. And one of the things that's been really sweet for me as the recipient of Richie is that as he has engaged his own stories of grief and loss and unaddressed desire from when he was young, not only has he become softer and more invitational and gives me a space to join him, but it's actually allowed him to join me in ways that were never even kind of possible before. So now if I'm bringing something that is, a story of hurt from my life, I get the privilege of his tears and his joining me as well. And this is a somewhat selfish thing to say on one level, that if the only benefit from his journey was so that I get the sweetness of his tenderness, I'd be so good with that. That'd be okay with me. It's selfish, but it's okay. It's true. But what's beauty is it really has created space where he can engage the world in ways that are kinder and firmer than he was before, because he can engage the world now in a space that isn't furrowed in the same way. He may be intense, but it isn't for the purpose of winning. And I think that's the difference in my interactions with Richie. Not all of this is scripted, so he didn't know I was going to say all of that. But it's really interesting to watch someone you love take that journey and soften and become more firm at the same time. It's like I think when we go on this journey, our feet are under us in a way they aren't before. We are stable both in who we are and who we are in Christ. So we don't have to always be right. We don't have to power up through anger so we can get our point across. We can bring it with strength, but not the kind of strength that makes others cower. And I think that is what the world is lacking. That is, as we look at our church and our country, and it doesn't matter what church you go to when I say our church, the world needs strong men, strong women who have their feet firmly under them because they know where they come from and they know where bad things lead. And they can stand in the gap and say, not on my watch. I am angry for you. I am not angry at you. And I'm going to stand in that place because you need to know that where you're leading is leading to death. And I'm not going to demand you change, and I'm not going to try to force you and control you to change, but I am going to stand and say, this is hurting you.
So that wraps up our teaching time. We just want to close by saying that we hope you've seen the character of God through fresh eyes as a passionate lover, a jealous partner, and a wounded healer. And now we invite you to commit yourself to move forward fully into the experience of walking with Jesus and engaging your world with the full strength of godly anger and desire. So we're going to shift furniture again, and do our final Q&A, and then we have a few things we'd like to share with you before we let you go. So don't go away until we've shared with you. We have some resources that we want to make available to you online. So stay by, online audience, while we make our little shuffle-roo here. Watch all the obstacles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, okay. Thanks, guys. Where's the button? Okay. Yep. Our question hostess is rushing to the front. I keep blocking this thing. Well, hey, we're here with no questions, so what do you want to talk about?
Richie's just going to wax eloquent.
I think I'm done with that. I think I'm done. All right, so if any of you here locally have questions you can ask in a moment, we have a microphone for you. Yeah, she's going to go get the questions. We'll be right here. Anybody here have a live local question? Because we're going to wing it while she goes to get the others that have come in via the web. Yeah. Okay. Question was, what about a person who's totally isolated? How do they find a safe place to open up? Great question. And that would go to you. Clearly.
I think that there's only so much that can be done in total isolation, to be honest. If I had someone who truly had no one and nothing, I would invite probably them to start journaling so that there is an outlet as they look for people, whether that be a counselor or a pastor. They may need to go outside of their own faith denomination so that they can find compassionate care. But we really can't enter into these places where we need care by ourselves, because we can't give ourselves care in the way that I think that God has called us to be the community for each other. I do believe that God meets us there. I do believe that prayer is a necessity as a part of that process. But part of what I would do, and have had these seasons actually where I was fairly isolated, and I started praying, God, who are you going to bring me? Please bring me someone, because this is more than what I can hold on my own. So I think it's important to not hold that out in a sense that, no, I am isolated, I'm going to stay isolated. I have found God is very creative when we pray to expand my circle, that he brings the most unlikely people. When I prayed that prayer many years ago, I was surprised by the person that kept coming to mind. I'm like, yeah, I must be hearing wrong. So I'd pray the prayer again, and another name, the same name came up again. I'm like, yeah, we actually didn't get along real well. I don't think that would be the person that you are actually talking to me about. And so I kept praying, and it was the only name that came. And so I invited this person for dinner and was surprised and humbled by the beauty of the relationship that unfolded as she offered herself to me and said, I would love to do this more often if that would be a blessing to you. Why, yes, actually, that's just what I was praying about. Right, of course. Yeah, I wasn't aware you were talking about like in an abusive situation. Of course, safety is absolutely necessary because grieving out in an environment that isn't safe is opening yourself up to further abuse. So it's like saying, knock down your walls so that you can be soft and tender so that I can attack you again. It's incongruent, and that wouldn't be something I would ever recommend.
Welcome, Cheryl.
Yes, I'm finally here with questions.
Yay. Looks like you've got a stack of them.
Well, it's amazing. After the last break, everybody just began to ask all kinds of questions. I think they figured you guys were safe enough to pose these questions.
Well, I hope
But
so.
the first one is, what would a healthy desire look like in communicating to a messy husband that you desire a clean and organized house? And this is a contentious issue that has gone on for years.
I think that's a great question, and what an awesome example. And as I listen to that question, I would ask the questioner, I would say, I think you need to do some more homework. Because I think you do desire a clean and tidy house. But I think there's a deeper desire under that that is more significant, and that desire is the path to your husband's heart.
Okay.
I don't know, what would you add to that?
I was going down a very similar vein in that as we think of that framework we had of context, threat, and desire, the messy house is the context. And so I think it's important to back it up to what is the desire, both for him and her. And then as that is engaged, that may uncover other relational dynamics that are so much deeper and more pervasive that the messy house is purely a symptom of. And so it's important, that's why we keep saying, take it back out of the context. Does context matter? Yes, of course, but not as much as what's going on underneath the context. And so I agree with Richie to back it up and look at what are the desires at play. And let's say, the wife has a pretty good understanding at this point. Let's say she's talked to her husband and said, so here's some things I'm learning. It's a little goofy, but let's try it on for size. And, kind of does the, here's the context. What are the desires? He engages that conversation with her. Well, now it's a different conversation. It might be competing desires. It might be something different in that this is her desire, but for a different reason, he is unwilling to meet it. Well, suddenly that's a much different conversation, like I said, than is it a messy house? Now it's about relational dynamics. And I think that it's whenever possible to take something out of the context and putting it into desire, you're going to be getting to the root as opposed to just nitpicking of, well, why are you always telling me to pick up the trash? Because it's on the floor and that's where you leave it. You can argue about that kind of stuff forever. Yep. But it really shifts the conversation when we go into desire.
Okay. I have another one about respect as a desire. Earlier, Richie mentioned that we desire respect from our children. How, as a parent, do you communicate that to your children?
That's a great question. I think to some extent, we as parents, we need to give our kids what we want to see from them. So if we want them to be calm and respectful, we need to treat them in calm and respectful ways. I think it's fair to communicate this is a value. We value each other. And in our house, we have a sign on the wall that says these are the Brower core values. And one of those values is respect. And sometimes when we're struggling amongst siblings or with parents, we'll walk to the living room with a child, we'll turn them towards the sign, and we'll say, how are we doing on the 4 Brower core values right now? Does this behavior fall in line with our value as a family of respect for one another? And what would it look like to be respectful, show respect, or speak respect? So I think there's ways we can communicate, but if we are with our mouths talking respect and with our actions disrespecting our children, we will never see the result we're looking for.
I think the one thing I would add into that too is to consider how authoritarian your parenting approach is, because if you don't let the child have a voice and thus respect their personhood separate from yours, it will be very hard for them to respect you because you have essentially taken away their personhood in disrespect by how your parenting style is. And so that may be something that you need to repent of to your child, that I've not allowed you to be a person and have thoughts and feelings apart from what I tell you is the appropriate thing. And I'm going to back away from that now. And oh, is it going to be a messy process? But to allow the child to trial and error.
These next two questions have to do with Ephesians 5,
Yes.
23
That's a good
through
one.
25. Okay, the first one, Richie, when you said that the man is the first to die, did you mean that the woman's desire is first fulfilled? Can you please re-examine your comment regarding Ephesians 5, 23 and 25? Specifically, what did you mean when you said that the man should be the first to die? Would you like to look at the scripture?
Nope.
Okay.
I'll be happy to re-examine my comment. What I meant by that, the Bible says that we're to die to self, right? And so if we come to a place, so what has happened sometimes with this idea of male headship in Christian homes is that we have interpreted that and has been preached from Christian pulpits that male headship means that the man makes the final call. I'm the buck stops here. All those kind of things come back into that idea. But when Jesus says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, this is Paul writing, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, he just referred us to Jesus Christ as our example. And the way that Jesus led the church was by living a holy life and then paying a penalty that he did not earn or deserve on the cross. And that meant that he died. That was how he loved the church. And he died to himself. He laid it all down. He laid it all down. Now, did he pick it back up? Yes, praise God. That's the hope of Christian community. So the way I understand that as a man is simply this, that if I desire certain things in my marriage relationship and my wife has needs, and we've lost track of how many times we've been sitting with a couple and he'll say, well, I need this, and she says, I need this, and well, I need this, well, I need this, and you look at them and say, well, who's going to go first? So what I mean when I say the man's the first to die is God's already answered that question. The answer to the question, who goes first in a Christian home, is the man. And that means, what that has meant in my home is that I go, okay, all right. I'm going to set this desire aside for the moment, and I'm going to focus on doing everything I can to meet yours, all right? And an amazing thing happens. This is part of kingdom economics. That when we serve one another, those things that we desire, if they are godly desires, come to us. It's part of heaven's plan. But we don't do it to get what we want. We do it because that's what God has asked us to do. Because here's the deal. Every man who sets out to serve his wife so that she will in turn serve him has been disappointed.
Because women have radar for that, and they know, and they intuitively are suspect and don't play ball.
They see right through us. Absolutely. God didn't make them dumb. They're smart. They see right through us. So the deal is, guys, we have to serve with no expectation of return. Now, I can tell you that by faith, you can expect return. God does good things. But we have to serve because we choose to, because we love her, because we made a commitment to serve her and her best interests for life. Period. And the hard part is, in some situations, you might, as a man, be making that steady, repeated decision to die to yourself for years before you see the fruit you desire. And we have to stay in it. That's the faith journey in relationship. We have to stay in it and keep doing the right thing, even if we're not getting the results. And I can tell you, all the men I've worked with over the years, from the point we started working together, it was only a matter of time. A clock started the instant we met for the first time. Some ran a little longer, some a little shorter, but every single man has always come back to me sooner or later with the same question. I've been doing all this good stuff and making all these good choices for all this time. When's she going to start? And I said, well, how long have you been treating her poorly? Oh, 20 years? Okay. Keep going. Keep going. So I hope that helps you understand. This truly is a dying to self. But here's the good news. When men learn to lead as Christ led, we won't have to ask, demand, or expect women to follow. They can't help themselves. They'll want to. because we are attracted to people who we know have our best interest at heart.
Amen. Okay. This one says, I identify with the limbic system of taking over and my frontal lobe paralyzing when dealing with confrontation. Do you have more concrete advice as to how to interrupt that habit? Maybe Richie has some steps. Oh, stop! It said that exactly.
Yes. Well, I was going to turn that one straight to you until that last little line. So how about if you give us some good ideas and I'll turn them into steps. We could be a team. You want to be a team?
Let's be a team.
Let's be a team. Help me.
She thinks it's really good.
I do think it's funny. I should say I'm not going to do formulas more often. All the questions will come to you. I think what's probably most important, first off, the first step would be to identify what your limbic system is triggering off of, because you can't interrupt it if you don't even know what it is. What would come after that, or as a part of that process, because sometimes it's not that simple as, oh, it was that one time when I was 9. You need compassionate care to help you in that process. Again, if you talk to us long, you're going to find out we're all about community and having people who are safe to talk through things with. Living in isolation doesn't work well. So to be able to disrupt that by understanding what it is, and then being able to look at how do you want to respond? What are the steps between there that might need to be taken? What do you want to throw in?
I think the one piece I would add, you're doing a good job with the steps, by the way. I'm very impressed. I think one thing that I would add would just be that understand that this is a process that has to be repeated over and over and over to reprogram that limbic system. So it can't be one and done. We've got to have a series of healthy, safe interactions to rewire the wiring from that negative or multiple negative interactions. So it takes time, so be patient.
I would also maybe start defining success differently, in that it's not, okay, I did it right this time. It was, okay, I realized sooner that I was being triggered and was able to do something. Yep. Or I was able, once I realized it, I was able to pull myself out of the situation and calm myself so that I could bring my prefrontal cortex back online. I know there's been certain instances where, to use an example, where I would get triggered, like if I was out and about and someone made an inappropriate comment, and I would just wither and not know what to say and like look down and walk away, stranger interaction kind of a thing. And I would just kick myself later because I was triggered and I didn't know what to do and I didn't know what to say, and I'm a really good communicator, but in those moments, poof, it's all gone. And I had a lot of self-contempt around that, because it was like, come on, get with it. You're not a stupid girl. Come on. And judgment, self-contempt, never helpful when it comes to rewiring the limbic system. And so to be able to realize, okay, and have an evaluative process, here's what was said, here's what happened in me, here's what I wish I would have said, and actually practice it. I wish I would have said this. And I mean, in my mind's eye, visualize, I wish I would have looked him in the eye and said this. And so that I'm not withering and limbically responding and just, paralyzing into a puddle. And finding that I define success when I know what I would have said within 2 minutes instead of 29. Or, you know what I mean? So I'm able to engage the process faster and faster. And on some of these things, I probably still haven't made it yet, where in that moment, there was, just to use the continued example, someone made an inappropriate comment, and in that moment, I was able to look them in the eye and say, boom, not out of fury, but out of, I am solid in myself and you don't get to hijack. But again, it's a process. It's not like Richie said, a one and done.
Sure. Okay. After years of living in abuse and not allowed to share grief or desire, I'm terrified to share mine. My desire is to be able to share, but I'm afraid. I hope Richie can share steps. I hate to say this, but everybody wants your steps, Richie.
Wow.
I love these people.
I know. These are good questions. These are harder questions here. first of all, thanks for your courage in sharing that question. That's really courageous to bring that out there. And I think recognizing that you're coming from an environment of abuse, it's very, very important that you find a safe place to begin experimenting, sharing. And I think it's important for those who have lived through abuse to recognize that their filters of safety are probably not the most trustworthy. And so I would recommend that in the process of finding a safe place, you may carefully seek counsel and see if you can validate that you have found a safe person. One would like to say that every counselor is a safe place. Of course, that's not true. They're humans, and some are not good at what they do. They are bound by certain laws, and so there should be a certain level of safety. But even those, we always recommend vetting a counselor. I would recommend vetting a mentor, vetting a pastor, and just saying, is this a safe place? Vetting a wise, seasoned, godly friend. And then give them a little. Trust with a little. Trust with stuff. If you have a story to share, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being your most traumatic part of your story, start them with a 1 and see if they handle it. And wait a few weeks and see if you hear it coming back from places it should never have gone. All of those would be indicators you, didn't find a safe person. So find that safe person and then begin to just share a little and see how they do. And if they handle it well, and they handle it graciously and with compassion, then share a little more. And just begin that practice and begin to experience what safety actually looks and, more importantly, what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. Good job.
Thanks. In one simple step.
One step. Okay, that's always good. Listen, I'm going to ask you to read this question, and then let me know whether we should read it verbally.
Okay. You want to ask us another question while we're reading it?
What is vetting? Explain what vetting is.
Vetting. Oh, vetting would be, for instance, in the case of a counselor, I would never go to a counselor that I hadn't researched. You can research them online. You can check their license information. You can, in our case, we check with other counselors. Say, what do you know about this person? And I would interview them. It's part of their job. So if you're going to choose a counselor, call them up and say, hey, I got a few questions for you. How would you handle this kind of situation? And how do you integrate your Christian belief, if you have any? And I would never recommend going to a counselor who didn't. But how do you integrate your Christian belief into your practice? And all those questions are going to help you have a better chance of getting a good fit. Even with good vetting, we've had some that didn't work well. So you vet, and then you be willing to say, okay, that didn't work. I'm going to keep looking and find somebody that really fits. So.
Yeah, even as a counselor, I have really good questions I can ask as I am trying to vet another counselor. And there's been at least one time where I spent over an hour on the phone with a counselor beforehand, just trying to make sure I understood where they were coming from. And we got into her office, and it was a train wreck. It was an absolute, by the end of one session, I was like, okay, and that will never be repeated. And Richie's like, no, it will not. We paid our copay, called her good, and never went back again. Not her good, the copay good, and that was the end. So I think what's important is to stay in the game and know that, again, your desire, even if it isn't met on your first time out, the desire to create safety and have safety is an important life-sustaining desire, and so it's important to re-enter it even if you get burned on your first try.
Yep, good.
And our last question has to do with physical desire. One spouse expresses their desire to the other spouse. This spouse clearly explains how their desire is not being met. Their spouse responds, too bad for you. My emphasis. Now your desire will not be met and you know it. What do you do with the walls and the anger?
If I had this person in front of me, I would ask about 15 follow-up questions, for one thing. Because I think that it's important to, and again, I'm answering this with no knowledge of the story outside of that question. I have talked to many couples where one person's desire was something that the other person found debasing in some way. They wanted to do a particular sexual act or engage in something, and the other person's like, I may have done it in the past, but I'm not comfortable now, or I've never been comfortable. And so the question is that a desire or is it a demand? And so in the cases that I'm thinking of right now, it wasn't I have this desire and the person says, too bad for you. I mean, I can see how it would be construed as that, but what the other person is saying is, I'm not comfortable with the act. There's something about that makes me uncomfortable. In some cases, it feels dehumanizing. And so the person who wants it perceives it as a too bad for you, but they're missing the other person's desire to have respect and not be dehumanized. So I think that's one piece. And now you're going to speak to the other piece.
Well, I don't know if it's the other piece you're thinking of, but when I hear that question, I'm like, well, this is actually not a question about physical intimacy. Physical intimacy is the place where certain brokenness in their relationship is manifesting itself. So the question that I would want to explore is, so what is the source of that anger and resentment that's saying too bad for you? What's the source of that? What's the source of the brokenness relationally, and can we repair that? Because physical intimacy is meant to be the fruit of other intimacy. It's part of the package, not the whole. And so I would say, can we explore? Is there an openness on the other side? Is there a desire for healing on both parties? Do we have two people that actually want something that works well? Or are we at a standoff where at least one party is not even willing to talk? I think those are all questions that I would ask, but the issue is actually not what's going on or not going on in the bedroom. That's simply a manifestation of a much deeper issue.
Well, that was our last question.
All right. Well, thank you. Any last questions from our live audience? You get the last say if you want to. No?
Smiles.
They're all falling over.
I think they're ready to be done.
Okay, then we're going to close this out. So I just want to say thank you. And sadly, I didn't print all my notes to bring up here for all my thank yous, but I want to say thank you to our camera team from He's Alive Television for being here and running cameras. You actually haven't seen them. They're running a joystick back in a room somewhere away from here this weekend. Thank you to Upper Columbia Conference for providing this beautiful facility that we could meet in. Thank you to Shine 104.9 for helping get the word out and promoting it and providing lots of goodies for you. We're grateful to them. And I want to say thank you to Cheryl Wallace for hosting our Q&A. Cheryl has done so much work. Cheryl works with me, and this lady has just run her legs off, literally getting ready for this weekend event and helping make it happen. And thank you to Judy Costerhone, who was our hostess this weekend, did a fabulous job. And of course, to my lovely wife for being willing to go down this road again and creating a brand new series and share it. Grateful to you. And of course, the biggest thanks goes to our hero, Jesus Christ, who has put the information that we need in his word, who has modeled all of these things to us, and is the all-time best example of anger and desire lived out in front of us. So I just want to say thank you, and thanks to all of you for joining us. But before you go, I have a request and an offer for all of you that are here in this room as well as watching us online or on television. The request is, we would love your feedback. And so if you have registered and you're getting our emails about this event, we will be sending you an email in a couple days. They'll say, would you please take our little online survey and give us your feedback? That'll just really help us know what connected and what we need to tighten up and make this better. And so for all of you out there, if you're in the room here or listening online, if you have not registered, you can go to our website even tonight and register and get your email address on our email list. We'll send you a link. We'd love your feedback. Just go to uccsda.org/fulcrum. Fulcrum, and that will get you to our registration page. There's a little button on the upper right-hand corner. It says register now, and that'll just take your first name and email address. You'll be on the list. We would love to have your feedback. That's so helpful to us. That'd be really valuable. The second thing that is an offer, if you will do that, for everyone who is on our list for this weekend event, we're going to send you a link to a short series of videos. Timmy and I, 2.5, 3 years ago now, did a video series called One Person Can. Some of you have seen it. It's a 7-part video series, and it grew out of the fact that as we were traveling around the country talking to people, couples and individuals kept coming up to us, and it was always an individual asking this question. And they'd come up to us and say, so my spouse actually doesn't want to work on our marriage. They're done, or they think it's fine, or whatever. Is there anything that just one person can do to make our relationship better, even if the spouse doesn't want to do anything? And so we kept hearing that question over and over. So we actually made a video series. They're about 20 minutes in length, each video, 20 to 30. And every video, 7 videos, is one thing that you can do to improve your marriage relationship, even if your spouse doesn't want to do anything. So if you'd like to get a link to that series, it's all online. We'll send that out if you're on the list for this event. So those of you that are already registered, you're on the list. And we'll be getting that to you as kind of here's a follow-up, some resources. If you want to get on the list, then go to that website, uccsda.org/fulcrum, and then click the Register Now button, and we'll have you, and we'll get that out to you this next week. So, anything else you want to say before we go? All right, then we'd like to say thank you so much for honoring us with your time, for joining us from Dillingham to Palmer to Spokane to College Place and Walla Walla and Othello and Lewiston, Clarkston.
And Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola!
That's just a
Yes.
fun word to say.
Love Coca-Cola. It's just the best name. So thank you all, and have a good night. Thank you all so much for coming. You just made this fun here. Your energy, your smiles, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. And if you did that, you did that totals that you out transformational goals and
We're actually going to be at the CAP tomorrow morning by 7:30 to do applesauce.
Oh, yeah.
There's things.
Okay. Well, just so you know, Christmas presents look really good with applesauce.
I'll keep that in mind.
Okay.